The first time I realized my family had been lying to me, I wasn't sitting at a family dinner. I was standing inside a bank. And I was staring at a transaction I had never made. The amount wasn't huge. It was only $3,800. But the name beside it made my stomach drop. Carter and Sons Development. My brother's company. I read the transaction again. Then again. I checked the date. 3 weeks earlier. That was the same week my mother had called me crying and told me my father needed another emergency payment for the house. She had said they were behind on their mortgage. She had said the bank was threatening foreclosure. And because I was their daughter, I had believed her. For 6 years, I had been sending money back to my parents in Ohio. Not because I was rich. Not because I enjoyed it. Because every time I tried to stop, someone in my family had a crisis. The furnace broke. Dad needed dental work. Mom had a medical bill. The roof leaked. The mortgage was behind. My brother needed help with his business. There was always something. And somehow I was always the solution. My name is Rachel Carter. And for years, I thought being a good daughter meant making sure my family never had to struggle. I didn't realize they had stopped seeing me as their daughter a long time ago. They had started seeing me as their emergency fund. And when I finally closed the account they had been draining, they didn't just get angry. They erased me. But 4 years later, my younger brother came looking for me. And when he finally found me, he didn't ask why I had disappeared. He stood on my porch, stared at the house behind me, and whispered, "Rachel, what did you do?" I didn't answer. Because after everything my family had done, I was finally ready for them to learn the truth. For years earlier, I was 32 years old and living in a small apartment outside Columbus. I worked as a financial analyst for a manufacturing company. It wasn't glamorous. I spent most of my days studying budgets, reviewing reports, and finding mistakes that other people missed. But I was good at it. I had worked hard to get there. I had student loans, rent, car payments, and my own dreams. I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to travel. I wanted to build a savings account large enough that one unexpected problem wouldn't destroy me. But every time I got close, my family needed money. My parents lived in Dayton. My younger brother, Tyler, had always been the favorite. He wasn't a bad person when we were children. But somewhere around high school, something changed. Tyler became the son who could do no wrong. If he failed a class, Dad said he was under pressure. If I got a B, Mom asked why it wasn't an A. If Tyler quit a job, he was finding himself. If I wanted to take a weekend off, I was becoming selfish. Still, I loved him. At least, I thought I did. The money started with small requests. "Rachel, could you send us $200? Then $500. Then $800. Eventually, my mother stopped asking for specific amounts. She would simply say, "Whatever you can spare." I usually sent more than I could spare. Then came the biggest request. Tyler had started a small property renovation business. He claimed he had found an incredible opportunity. A rundown duplex. He planned to renovate it, sell it, and make enough money to expand. Dad was convinced Tyler was going to become a millionaire. Mom called me one Sunday evening. "Your brother just needs a little help getting started." "How much?" There was silence. Then she said, $10,000. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I thought she was joking. "Mom, I don't have $10,000. You have savings. That savings is for my house." "Rachel." Her voice changed. That disappointed tone. The one that made me feel like I had failed an exam I didn't know I was taking. "Your brother is trying to build something." "I know. And your father and I are doing everything we can." "I know. So why are you acting like helping your family is some terrible burden?" I closed my eyes. "Because I can't keep doing this." Mom went completely silent. Then she said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "Fine." Just that. "Fine." Then she hung up. I expected an apology. I expected her to call the next day. She didn't. Instead, Dad called. Then Tyler. Then my aunt. Then my mother again. Everyone had the same message. I was being selfish. I was abandoning my family. I was letting Tyler down. Eventually, I gave them $7,500. It was almost everything I had saved. Tyler promised to pay me back. He never did. A year later, I learned why. The property had never belonged to him. My parents had bought it. With money from me. And the money I thought was helping my brother's business had actually been used to pay off debts connected to the property. When I confronted my parents, my father didn't even look embarrassed. He simply said, "We did what was necessary. With my money, our family needed it. Then why didn't you tell me?" Dad looked at me. "Because you would have said no." That sentence changed something inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Something simply broke. Because he was right. They had hidden the truth because they knew I wouldn't agree. I went home that night and looked at my bank statements. 6 years. Thousands of dollars. Every transfer. Every emergency. Every time my mother cried. Every time my father promised it would be the last time. And then I noticed something. The payments weren't random. They had been happening almost every month. For years. I wasn't helping my family survive. I was financing their lifestyle. And Tyler's. So I did something I had never done before. I stopped. No announcement. No dramatic speech. I simply transferred the remaining money in my checking account into a separate savings account and told my bank I wanted stronger security on my finances. Then I waited. The first week was quiet. The second week was quiet. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. "Mom." I answered. "Hi. Did you forget?" "Forget what?" "The payment." I looked out my office window. "What payment?" "The monthly transfer." I took a breath. "Mom, I'm not sending it anymore." Silence. Then she laughed. Not happily. More like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done." "You can't be done." "Why not?" "Because we're your parents." I stared at my computer screen. "That doesn't mean I'm responsible for every bill you have." Her voice became cold. "After everything we've done for you?" I almost laughed. Everything they had done for me? I thought about every Christmas I had spent working overtime. Every birthday I had skipped because my family needed money. Every time I had delayed my own plans. But I didn't argue. I simply said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't do this anymore." Then I hung up. That was the last peaceful conversation I ever had with my mother. 3 days later, she called again. I didn't answer. Dad called. I didn't answer. Tyler called. I didn't answer. Then came the messages. "You are hurting this family. Your father is devastated. Tyler may lose everything. How can you do this to us?" I didn't respond. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself. And I thought that was the hardest part. I was wrong. Because 2 weeks later, I received a call from my aunt. She didn't say hello. She said, "Rachel, where are you?" I frowned. "At work. Your mother says you left." "What?" "She said you disappeared." I felt the room around me go strangely quiet. "I didn't disappear." My aunt hesitated. "That's not what your mother said." "What exactly did she say?" Another pause. "She told everyone you packed your things and left." I stared at my desk. Why would she say that? My aunt didn't answer. And that's when I realized. My mother wasn't telling people that I had stopped sending money. She was telling them I had vanished. I called my mother. She answered immediately. "Rachel, why are you telling people I disappeared?" Silence. Then she said, "You disappeared from us." I stopped sending money. Same thing. "No, Mom. It isn't." Her voice hardened. "You don't get to abandon your family and then complain about what people think." "I'm not complaining. I'm asking you to stop lying." She laughed. Then she said, "You'll come back." "Why?" "Because you always do." That was the moment I knew. I wasn't coming back. I changed my phone number. I moved apartments. I stopped explaining myself. And for the first time in years, I began building a life that belonged entirely to me. But I didn't know my family had already started building a story about me. And in their story, I was the selfish daughter who had disappeared. The first year was difficult. Not financially. Emotionally. I had spent so long believing that keeping everyone happy was my responsibility that guilt followed me everywhere. I would walk through a grocery store and think about Mom. I'd see a father helping his daughter with something and think about Dad. I'd hear a brother joking with his sister and think about Tyler. Then I'd remember the bank statements, the lies, the property, the money, and I would remind myself, I didn't abandon them. I stopped funding them. There was a difference. Slowly, things improved. I paid off my credit card. I rebuilt my savings. I took a vacation. I bought a small house. It wasn't huge. 2 bedrooms. A little backyard. An old kitchen that needed work. But when I turned the key for the first time, I stood inside that empty living room and cried. Because nobody had helped me buy it. Nobody had paid the down payment. Nobody had called me selfish for spending money on myself. I had done it. Completely alone. Then I did something unexpected. I started helping people again. But this time I chose who to help. I volunteered with a local financial education program. Most of the people who came in were young adults who had never been taught how money worked. They were terrified of credit cards, loans, debt, taxes, budgets. I understood them. Because I had spent years making financial decisions based on guilt instead of logic. One woman told me, "My family says I'm selfish if I don't give them money." I looked at her, and I knew exactly what to say. Helping people is generous. Destroying your own future to keep someone else comfortable isn't generosity. That sentence became almost a personal rule. Over the next 3 years, my life changed. I got promoted, then promoted again. I started consulting on the side. Eventually, I bought a small commercial building with a partner. We renovated the upstairs offices and rented them to local businesses. It wasn't overnight success. It was boring, slow, careful, but it worked. And then, one afternoon, I received an email from an attorney. The subject line was, "Carter Family Property, Urgent Notice." I almost deleted it. Then I saw my full legal name. I opened it and froze. The attorney represented the lender that held the mortgage on the duplex Tyler had supposedly purchased. The property was in default. The lender was preparing legal action. But the part that confused me was this. My name appeared in documents connected to the property. I called the attorney. "Why is my name on this?" She said, "That's exactly what we're trying to determine." "What does that mean?" "According to the records, you were listed as a financial guarantor." I never signed anything. "That's what we need to investigate." My hands went cold. I asked her to send everything. When the documents arrived, I spent hours reading them. And then I found something. A signature. My signature. Or something that looked like it. The problem? I had never signed it. The signature had been copied from an old document. Someone had taken my signature and placed it onto paperwork I had never seen. And suddenly, for years after I stopped sending money, my family wasn't just lying about me. They had potentially used my identity. I called the attorney. "I want to know everything," she said. "Then you need to understand something." "What?" "This isn't just a family debt issue anymore." The next morning, I reported the suspected forgery. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Tyler. I didn't warn anyone. I wanted the truth first. 2 weeks later, investigators contacted me. They asked questions. When did I last communicate with my family? Did I authorize any loans? Had I ever visited the property? Did I know about a second account connected to the business? I answered every question. Then they asked one that made my stomach turn. "Did your family ever have access to your financial documents?" I thought about my mother. She had always kept copies of everything. Tax forms, pay stubs, insurance paperwork, old bank statements. I suddenly remembered something from years earlier. Mom had once told me, "I keep your paperwork because you lose everything." At the time, I'd laughed. Now I didn't. Months passed. I heard nothing. Then, one Saturday morning, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the window and froze. Tyler, my younger brother. He stood on my porch holding his phone. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he looked up at the camera. "Rachel?" I opened the door halfway. He stared at me. "You look different." I almost smiled. "For years we'll do that." He swallowed. "Can I come in?" "No." He looked surprised. "Rachel, why are you here?" He lowered his voice. Mom told me to find you. I stared at him. Why? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, because she says you owe us. I actually laughed. Tyler didn't. He looked exhausted. Rachel, something's wrong. Something has been wrong for years. No, I mean something else. He looked behind himself, then back at me. Mom and Dad never told me everything. That got my attention. I opened the door slightly wider. What didn't they tell you? Tyler looked at the house behind me, and suddenly his eyes widened. There was something on my dining room table. A folder. The legal documents. He recognized the logo. His face changed. Where did you get that? I didn't answer. He stepped backward. Rachel, how much do you owe? He stared at me, then whispered, I don't know. That's not an answer. Because I don't know. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not anger. Not entitlement. Fear. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Start talking. Tyler rubbed his forehead. Mom said you were helping us. I was. She said you stopped because you were angry. I stopped because I found out where my money was going. He looked at me. She told me you were jealous. I stared at him. Jealous of what? Of me. I almost couldn't believe it. Tyler, I gave you thousands of dollars. I know. No, you don't. He looked down, then said something that changed everything. Rachel, I didn't know it was your money. I went completely still. What? He looked up. Mom told me the money came from an investment account Dad had. My heart sank. Tyler continued. She said Dad had saved it for years. I whispered. She lied to both of us. He didn't argue. Because somewhere inside him, he already knew. Then Tyler looked at me. There's something else. What? He took out his phone. Mom told me to find you because she needs you to sign something. I stared at him. What? He turned the screen toward me. It was a photograph of a document. A legal agreement. And at the bottom was a signature that looked exactly like mine. Except this time, I recognized the document. It was dated 6 months before I had even moved to Ohio. I had never seen it before. Tyler whispered, Rachel, what is going on? I looked at my brother, then at the fake signature, then back at him. I think Mom and Dad have been using my name for years. Tyler's face went pale. And for the first time in our entire lives, my brother wasn't defending them. He was afraid of them too. Tyler came inside. I didn't want him there. But I knew something important had changed. For years, I had believed Tyler was part of the plan. Now I wasn't sure. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table. He looked around. You really did all this yourself? Yes. He shook his head. Mom said you were living in some tiny apartment and barely getting by. I stared at him. She told everyone I disappeared. She said you were unstable. That one hurt. Not because I believed it, but because my mother had apparently been telling people whatever she needed to make herself look innocent. I slid the legal documents across the table. Read. Tyler did. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, he looked up. I never knew. I believe you. He stared at me. Why? Because if you knew, you wouldn't have come here looking terrified. He looked away. Then he said, There's a reason I came. What? Mom isn't asking you to sign something because of the property. I waited. She's asking because the bank is investigating. My heart sank. Investigating what? Tyler took a deep breath. Everything. Apparently, one of his former business partners had contacted authorities after discovering that several documents contained questionable signatures. The investigation had expanded. Bank records, loan applications, property transfers, business accounts. And my name kept appearing. Tyler said he had been told that if investigators contacted him, he should claim he didn't know anything. Who told you that? Mom. I stood. She told you to lie to investigators? Tyler didn't answer. He didn't have to. I walked to the window. For years ago, I had thought my family was simply greedy. Now I realized it was much worse. They had created an entire system around me. My income, my identity, my reputation, my silence. And they had assumed I would always be too guilty to fight back. Tyler suddenly said, Rachel, I need to tell you something. I turned. When you stopped sending money, Mom didn't just tell people you disappeared. What else did she say? She told them you had stolen money from Dad. I stared at him. Excuse me? She said you took money from a family account and left. I felt my jaw tighten. Did you believe her? Tyler shook his head. At first. I sat down. Why did you stop believing her? He looked at me. Because I found the account. What account? The one the money was going into. He showed me his phone. There was a bank statement. I read the name. It wasn't my parents' account. It wasn't Tyler's business account. It belonged to a company I'd never heard of. Northridge Holdings, LLC. I looked at Tyler. Who owns it? He swallowed. Mom. Everything suddenly clicked. The property. The loans. The payments. My money. The fake documents. My parents had created a company. Money flowed into it. Then it moved into different accounts. Some went toward Tyler's business. Some paid debts. Some paid household expenses. And some. Tyler didn't know where they went. But there was one problem. My parents had apparently listed me as an owner on one of the company's older filings. Without my knowledge. I called my attorney. By Monday morning, everything was moving. Documents were requested. Records were subpoenaed. Bank information was examined. And then we found the first major piece of evidence. A message from my mother. Not to me. To Tyler. The message was dated 4 years earlier. It said, she'll give in. Just keep telling everyone she's angry and doesn't want anything to do with us. I stared at the screen. There was another message. If she calls, don't tell her about Northridge. And another. Once the property sells, we'll fix everything. My attorney looked at me. This is important. I nodded. But I wasn't satisfied. I wanted to know what fix everything meant. Then we discovered something even stranger. My parents hadn't just been using my money. They had been planning to sell something. Something they believed belonged to them. My childhood home. The house where I grew up. The house my father always said was the one thing nobody could take from us. Except, there was a problem. Years earlier, when I was 24, my grandmother had died. She had left me something. I barely remembered it because my parents had handled almost everything. A small inheritance. My mother had told me it was only a few $1,000s. But the actual estate documents told a different story. My grandmother had owned a piece of land outside Dayton. Not a mansion. Not a fortune. Just 12 acres. And she had left it to me. My parents had never told me. They had apparently placed it into a holding company. The same company. Northridge. And now the land was worth considerably more than anyone had expected. I sat there staring at the document. My grandmother had given me something. My parents had hidden it. Then they had used my identity to control it. And suddenly, the reason for everything became clear. They weren't trying to survive. They were trying to keep control. And I had been the one person standing in their way. My attorney said, Rachel, you have 2 choices. I looked at her. What choices? You can settle quietly. And the other? Take it all the way. I thought about my mother saying, you always come back. I thought about my father saying, you would have said no. I thought about Tyler standing on my porch. And I realized something. For years, I had been afraid of destroying my family. But they had never been afraid of destroying me. So I chose the second option. We took it all the way. The next 6 months were brutal. There were meetings, documents, interviews, lawyers, questions, more questions. My parents stopped contacting me directly. Instead, relatives started calling. My aunt, my cousins, family friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. They all said the same thing. Your parents are heartbroken. You need to forgive them. Family should stay together. Nobody asked what had happened. Nobody asked why my name was on documents I had never signed. Nobody asked why my grandmother's property had been transferred without my knowledge. They simply wanted me to make the problem disappear. Then one Sunday afternoon, my father called. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Hello. There was silence. Then his voice. Rachel. I hadn't heard it in years. Yes. We need to talk. No. You're making a mistake. I'm not the one who forged documents. Another silence. Then Dad said, "You don't understand what happened." Then explain it. We were protecting the family. From what? From losing everything. I laughed softly. You already had my money. We needed more. There it was. No apology. No denial. Just the truth. You used me. That's not fair. You told everyone I disappeared. You abandoned us. I stopped sending you money. Same thing. I closed my eyes. Then I asked, "Did Grandma leave me the land?" Silence. That silence told me everything. Did she? Dad finally said. She didn't understand what was best. My voice became quiet. She left it to me. She left it to the family. No. She left it to me. Your mother, and I made sure it stayed safe. By putting it in a company I didn't know existed? Dad's breathing changed. Then he said, "Rachel, if you destroy us, you're going to regret it." I opened my eyes. Is that a threat? No. It sounded like one. I'm your father. And I'm your daughter. He didn't answer. I said, "You could have called me." We did. You could have told me the truth. You would have said no. I almost smiled. Exactly. Then I hung up. The case continued. And eventually, Tyler gave investigators everything. Messages. Emails. Documents. Bank records. He admitted he had accepted money without knowing where it came from. He also admitted that Mom had told him I was financially unstable and had abandoned the family. The truth finally started coming together. My parents had used my identity to establish financial guarantees. They had transferred my grandmother's land into a company they controlled. They had used money I sent home to keep their debts manageable. And when I stopped, they panicked. Instead of admitting the truth, they created a story. I had run away. I was unstable. I was angry. I had stolen from them. Anything that kept people from asking where the money had gone. Then came the biggest discovery. The land was about to be sold. Not for a few $100,000. For nearly $1.8 million. I stared at the number. My grandmother's 12 acres. The land my parents had hidden from me. The land they were preparing to sell. My attorney looked at me. Now you understand why they needed your signature. I nodded. They didn't need me because they loved me. They needed my name. Because if I signed, everything would become legitimate. If I refused, the entire structure could collapse. I remembered Tyler's words. Mom needs you to sign something. That was it. That was why she had sent him. Not to find her missing daughter. Not to repair the family. To get my signature. I suddenly felt sick. But then something unexpected happened. Tyler called me. Rachel? Yes. I need to tell you something. What? I found Dad's old laptop. My heart started beating faster. Where? In the storage unit. What did you find? Emails. About what? Tyler's voice dropped. About Grandma. I sat down. What about her? There was an email from Mom. To who? To an attorney. I waited. She wrote that Grandma had changed her will before she died. I couldn't breathe for a second. What does that mean? Tyler said. Mom knew. Knew what? She knew the land belonged to you. The room went silent. Then Tyler said, Rachel, Mom knew the whole time. There are moments when anger is so deep that it becomes strangely quiet. That was how I felt. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there. Because suddenly, every memory had a different meaning. My grandmother telling me, don't let anyone convince you that you don't deserve good things. My mother changing the subject whenever Grandma talked about her estate. My father insisting that I didn't need to worry about paperwork. The mysterious documents. The money. The lies. They knew. They had always known. My attorney requested the original estate records. And there it was. My grandmother had specifically left the land to me. Not my parents. Not Tyler. Me. There was even a letter. I had never seen it. It said she wanted me to have the land because she believed I was the only person in the family who understood that security isn't the same as wealth. I read that sentence over and over. Then I cried. Not because of the money. Because my grandmother had known me. She had understood exactly what my parents had turned me into. Someone who believed love had to be earned through sacrifice. The investigation eventually reached a settlement hearing. My parents were there. I hadn't seen them face to face in 4 years. My mother looked older. My father looked smaller. Tyler sat several seats away from them. When my mother saw me, her eyes filled with tears. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the message. She'll give in. The hearing began. My attorney presented the documents. The forged signatures. The transfers. The messages. The hidden company. The estate records. The financial trail. One piece after another. My parents' attorney tried to argue that everything had been done for the benefit of the family. My attorney asked one simple question. If everything was done honestly, why was Rachel never told? No one had an answer. Then came the issue of the money. The total amount I had sent over the years was calculated. It was far more than I had ever realized. My parents had used my money to pay debts. They had used it for Tyler's business. They had used it to cover expenses. And some had been moved into accounts I had never known existed. Then the judge asked my mother directly whether she had ever told relatives that I had disappeared. My mother hesitated. Then she said, "She left us." The judge asked, "Did she leave her residence?" "No." "Did she stop communicating with everyone?" "No." "Did she stop providing money?" My mother looked down. Finally, "Yes." The judge looked at her. Then she did not disappear. The room went completely silent. I looked at my mother. For the first time in my life, she had no story left. No guilt. No emotional manipulation. No family pressure. Just facts. After the hearing, Tyler found me in the hallway. "Rachel." I turned. He looked like he wanted to say something. "What?" "I'm sorry." I nodded. He swallowed. "I should have known." "Yes." "I should have asked questions." "Yes." He looked down. Then he said, "I thought you hated us." I stared at him. "I didn't hate you." "Then why didn't you come back?" I took a breath. "Because every time I came back, I lost another piece of myself." He looked at me. I continued. "You didn't lose your sister when I left, Tyler. You lost the person who kept paying for everything." His eyes filled with tears. And for once, I didn't comfort him. Not because I wanted him to suffer. Because I was finally allowing him to feel the consequences of what our family had done. He nodded slowly. Then he said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." "Good." He looked surprised. I smiled slightly. "Forgiveness isn't something you demand." Then I walked away. The case eventually ended. The land was returned to me. The financial obligations connected to my identity were removed. The company my parents had created was dismantled. Some money was recovered. Some wasn't. And Tyler had to rebuild his life from scratch. My parents lost the property they had been trying to sell. They were forced to face the consequences of years of deception. But I didn't celebrate. Because revenge wasn't what I wanted. Freedom was. And I finally had it. 6 months later, I stood on my grandmother's land for the first time. The 12 acres were beautiful. Trees. Open fields. A small creek. Nothing spectacular. But it was mine. Not because I had bought it. Not because I had fought my family for it. Because my grandmother had chosen to leave it to me. I eventually decided not to sell it. Instead, I partnered with a local nonprofit. We built a small financial education center on part of the property. A place where young adults could learn about money, credit, debt, contracts, family finances, and most importantly, boundaries. The first time I gave a workshop there, I stood in front of 20 people. I told them something I wish someone had told me when I was 25. Being generous doesn't mean you owe everyone access to your wallet. People laughed. Then I said, "Love shouldn't require you to destroy your own future." Nobody laughed that time. Because everyone understood. A year after the case ended, I received one final letter from my mother. I didn't open it immediately. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Finally, I opened it. There was no apology. Not really. There were explanations. Excuses. Things about how hard her life had been. Things about how she thought she was protecting the family. Then, near the bottom, she wrote, "I never thought you would actually choose yourself. I read that sentence twice. Then I folded the letter. I didn't respond. Because that sentence told me everything I needed to know. My family hadn't been shocked that I stopped sending money. They had been shocked that I stayed gone. They had expected guilt to bring me back. It didn't. 2 weeks later, Tyler contacted me. He had found a job. A normal job. No business. No shortcuts. No borrowed money. He told me he was paying his debts slowly. Then he said, "Rachel, Mom keeps asking whether you'll ever come home." I asked, "Do you think I should?" He was quiet. Then he said, "I think home is supposed to be somewhere you feel safe." I smiled. "That's the smartest thing you've ever said." He laughed. We didn't become close again overnight. There were no magical family dinners. No emotional movie ending. Trust doesn't work that way. But slowly, we began talking. Not about money. Not about our parents. Just life. Work. Weather. Random things. It was strange. But it was real. And I preferred something small and real to something big and fake. A few months later, I went back to Dayton. Not to my parents' house. To my grandmother's old neighborhood. I stood outside the house where I had spent my childhood. The house looked smaller than I remembered. I thought about the little girl I had been. The girl who believed that being loved meant being useful. The girl who thought saying no made her selfish. The woman standing there now knew better. I wasn't selfish. I was finally awake. My parents had spent years telling people I had disappeared. But the truth was much simpler. I hadn't disappeared. I had stopped disappearing inside myself. I had stopped being the daughter who paid every bill. Stopped being the sister who fixed every mistake. Stopped being the person who apologized whenever someone else was angry. And when my family lost access to me, they finally discovered how much of their life had been built around my sacrifice. That's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes people don't miss you. They miss what you did for them. They miss the money, the favors, the silence, the way you solved problems without asking questions. And when you finally stop, they may call you selfish. They may tell relatives you changed. They may rewrite the story until you're the villain. But you don't have to keep defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. My parents told everyone I had run away. For years, I thought I needed to prove them wrong. I didn't. Because eventually, the truth found its way home without me carrying it there. My brother found me. The documents found me. My grandmother's letter found me. And finally, I found myself. For years after I disappeared, I stood on 12 acres of land my grandmother had left me and watched the sun go down. My phone buzzed. A message from Tyler. "You won't believe what Mom just told me." I smiled. Then another message appeared. She said she still thinks you're going to come back someday. I looked across the field. For years, those words would have hurt. This time, they didn't. I typed one sentence. "Tell her I'm not coming back to the old life." I paused, then added, "But I'm finally home." And I put my phone away. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't making the people who hurt you suffer. Sometimes it's building a life so peaceful they can no longer reach you with their chaos. And sometimes, the person your family claims disappeared was simply the person who finally stopped letting them decide where she belonged.